Right, good morning, grade 12s. I am continuing today with yesterday's lesson. Remember, our topic is the problems with public sector provisioning. There are 6 problems with public sector provisioning. Yesterday we did the first 3. We looked at accountability, we looked at assessing needs, and we looked at efficiency or inefficiency. Right. So today's lesson, we are in the textbook on page 53. And we are still busy with problems with public sector provisioning. And remember, I did say yesterday that this is a possible essay question. This is the first of 2 essay questions in chapter 3. All right, so the fourth reason for public sector provisioning being problematic is a pricing policy. Now, we said yesterday that there's a difference between how the private sector decides what to produce and how many of those things to produce, and how the public sector makes those decisions. In the market economy, obviously we have demand and supply, and through the interaction of demand and supply, the market will come up with an equilibrium price. All right, so the price is formed by demand and supply. And in the private sector, obviously businesses will supply however many they're willing to supply at the equilibrium price so that they can maximize their profits. But in the public sector does not have a profit motive. Remember, the public sector has to do things to improve social welfare. They have to look after the greater good of the community. So the pricing mechanism on the decision of how they decide the price to charge for things has to work obviously very differently. All right. So the government has to take into account certain social conditions. Okay, they cannot just supply goods, for example, to people that can pay for them. There's certain things they have a responsibility to see that everybody's basic needs at least are satisfied. So the pricing mechanism in that case will not always work. But there's also economic considerations that they have to think about. You'll see we're going to talk about it later. But for example, if people don't pay for something, generally there's an overconsumption. Okay, but I'll give you an example of that later. Political conditions they have to take into account as well. Okay, for example, their own political goals. For example, redistribution of income. All right, so they have to provide goods in such a way that it meets their objectives that they put themselves. Right, environmental conditions, obviously there's limitations on the environment. There is only a limited amount of resources available to begin with. So sometimes it just isn't viable to provide goods for everybody. All right, now there's different pricing policies that can be used, and we are going to look at the different pricing policies that is available for the government to use. Right, the first one is called a free of charge service. All right, in this case, the public goods will be offered completely free of charge to the consumer of the goods. Please note, we are not saying that these are free goods. There's no such thing as free goods. Somebody pays for it. We are saying this is a free of charge service. All right. In other words, the person using the service doesn't pay for the service that he is receiving. All right, so it's free of charge to the people that are consuming the goods and services. But as I said, there's no such thing as free goods necessarily. It's not free. The cost of providing these services is completely met from taxes. So the government will use their tax money that they have raised, and they will use that tax money to provide goods and services to people that people are not necessarily going to be paying for. All right. Now, when we refer to a full cost recovery means that we are charging users according to their use of the good or service. All right. So if people are literally paying for the goods and services that they are using, then we use the term a full cost recovery, which means that none of the cost is going to be covered through taxes. People are literally going to pay according to their use of the goods and services. All right. Now, when we look at a free of charge service, obviously the cost of production of this public goods and services will be covered by the taxpayers. So taxpayers will pay their taxes And from the pool of taxes that the government receives, they will obviously then take some of that tax money in order to cover the cost of providing public goods and services. All right. Now, earlier on in this chapter, we did refer to the difference between community goods and collective goods. A free of charge service, this pricing policy is normally used in the case of some community goods and some collective goods as well. Right, in the case of community goods, remember we said your community goods are indivisible. All right, in other words, the services has to be provided either to everybody or to nobody. All right, so either everybody has access or nobody has access. So community goods, the cost of providing community goods is completely covered from taxation. All right, there's no price that can be charged for these. Like the Defence Force, like the Police Force, like street lights, we spoke about the challenges of charging prices for these things earlier in this chapter. It's not always possible to have a charge for these things. These things, the cost of providing these community goods are covered completely from taxation. In terms of collective goods we said are also indivisible, but even though they are indivisible, sometimes it is possible for us to exclude the free riders. Remember, our free riders are those people that make use of public goods and services, but they do not contribute to taxes. So they are getting these services without basically paying for them. All right. Now, in the case of certain collective goods, there will also not be, it'll be free of charge, free of charge collective goods. But in certain cases, we can levy fees. All right, like with the toll road, etc., etc. We're going to look at that just now. Okay. But what is important is we need to look at what is the cost of collecting these tolls. If the cost of collecting the fee is higher than the revenue that we are going to be receiving, then it's not worth levying a cost, right? If your income is less than your cost, it's going to be run at a loss in any case. So then it's easier to just provide the costs through taxes. All right. So with collective goods, sometimes there is going to be a user charge. Sometimes if it's not economically viable, if it's like not efficient for us to try to raise funds or to try to make people pay for this, then it is rather also going to be a free of charge collective goods. Right. The second pricing policy that is available to government is to levy a user charge. Right. This is used sometimes in the case of collective goods. All right. So sometimes the state is going to decide to levy a fee that people must pay for the use of public goods and services. So those people that use the goods and services will pay for them, and those people that don't use them obviously will not pay for them. All right. Now, some public goods, it is very easy to get this levy, to charge this levy, like on a toll road. Okay, on a toll road, it is very simple, it's very efficient. We build the toll station there in the middle of the road. Everybody has to drive through the toll station and they have to pay their toll fees. Okay, the cost of collecting the toll is minimal. There's obviously some infrastructure that needs to be built, and there's wages and salaries for the people that actually sit inside of those toll booths. All right, but it's very easy to do. All right. With others, like the police, like with the street lights, for example that we used earlier in the year, like a robot, that is more difficult. How are we going to manage whether people are paying for the service or not? All right. So with community goods, there's always, like police, police and street lights, those are community goods. There's never a user charge on community goods because it is impossible, right? But in the case of collective goods, the government is going to look at three different considerations, three different factors when they decide whether they're going to make use of a user charge or not. The first factor that they take into account are technical factors. All right. In the case of a toll road, for example, the toll roads normally is the wide, big double lane, like 4 lanes, whatever the roads that goes kind of, between different major cities, etc., etc. Now, obviously, to build a road instead of just a single lane road, to build now a double lane road or a road with 4 lanes going both ways, obviously that is very expensive to build that road. So the reason why we levy toll charges on these roads is so that we can recover a part of the cost of building those roads. All right. And then the advantage of using the toll road, obviously, is that those people who drive on those roads and those people whose vehicles damage those roads, they are the ones that pay for the maintenance of that road and for the building of that road. It would not be fair that everybody's tax money must now be used to maintain a road that only a handful of people use. So in the case of a toll fee on a road, the idea is that those people who use that road must make it, they must pay for using that road. All right. But obviously having like a double lane road, the effect that it has on traffic flow, it makes it easier, right? It's easier for people. The traffic flows better. People can get to their destination quicker. But the idea is that it is expensive. All right. Now, with the normal roads, I'm not talking toll roads now, all the roads that is in our country, obviously it needs to be maintained as well. Now, we don't use like general tax money for the maintenance of the roads necessarily. Everybody that owns a car every year must pay for the vehicle license. All right, not the driver's license, the motor vehicle license. And that money, together with a fuel levy, goes into a fund, and they use this money to maintain the roads. So again, if you don't own a car, you are not going to pay a vehicle license. If you don't own a car, you're never going to put petrol in a car because you don't have one. So you do not pay the taxes that are used to fix the roads. All right, again, it is those people who use the road that is paying. Those people that have cars that is going to drive on that road, they pay that vehicle license. They pay through the vehicle license for the maintenance of the roads. Same with the fuel levy. The fuel levy is an indirect tax that they add onto the price of fuel. So every single time that you put fuel into your car, you are also paying the fuel levy. You, as the road user, your fuel levy is going to be used then to maintain the roads. All right. The second factor they take into account is economic reasons. All right. Now, if you just think, sometimes when things are for free, and I say that in inverted commas, right? At a zero price, if something doesn't have a price and everybody can just get those things for free, sometimes the demand is so high that we have a misallocation of resources. All right. Like, for example, at a wedding. Now, if you go to a wedding and the drinks are on the house, right? Everybody drinks more than what they normally would because it's for free, right? If you don't pay for something, you tend to abuse that resource. So in certain cases, like with water and electricity, for example, if we weren't made to pay for this, people would be using more electricity than what they really, really need to. People would be using water more than what they really, really need to, right? If we didn't pay for water, we would all bath every single night, and we would fill that bath right up into the rim of the bath with bubble bath and everything, and we'd keep adding hot water because we are not paying for it. But now the government, remember, water is a scarce resource. There isn't enough for everybody, right? So we have to pay for the water that we use. When we pay for something, we use it more carefully. We're more conservative with our use of water because we are paying for it. All right. So the government knows that if something doesn't have a price and they don't make us pay something, we are going to abuse those resources. And these resources are all scarce. So we can't allow that to happen. Right. Then the last factor that they take into account is the political reasons. All right. Now, in a country like ours where the income distribution is very, very unequal, sometimes they need to kind of have a staggered kind of payment system where some people will pay for certain things and some people will pay less. Price discrimination. Some people will pay more, some people will pay less. All right. They do this, for example, for public health. They do this in education as well. All right. So the poorest people will not pay at all. Okay. Like, for example, at a no-fee school, parents do not pay school fees at all. Right. And beyond that, fees are staggered according to the income levels. All right. Some school fees are higher. Some school fees are lower, depending on the subsidy that we receive from the government. All right. So poorer people will pay less and wealthier people obviously will pay more. All right, it's a way of redistribution. Okay, remember political reasons refers to the government's objectives. The government, one of their objectives is to create a redistribution of income, a more fair distribution of income. And they can achieve this through a staggered payment system like this. All right, where wealthier people pay a little bit more than the poor people. Okay. The last pricing strategy that is available to the government is called subsidies. All right. So sometimes the government subsidizes the provision of certain public services. Okay. So when we pay for public goods that we receive, it is less than what we actually should be paying. All right. So in other words, what we are paying doesn't cover the full cost of providing those public goods. A part of that cost is covered by the government, so they will subsidize the service. Okay, like for example, in state schools, in government schools, every government school gets a subsidy. And you'll think back, I can't remember that we made a big hoo-ha of it this year, but normally on the 10th school day at the beginning of the year, you have to complete a survey. Right? We count. The first 10 school days, we literally count every single day. How many boys are in class? How many girls are in class? What is the total in class? And then we add it all together to get the number for the school. That is very important because on the 10th school day, the government will then, the Department of Education knows exactly how many kids are registered at KHS, and then the school gets a subsidy per child. So for every child that is enrolled at a public school, the government provides a subsidy. So the school gets some money from the government in order to provide education. All right, it's also staggered, obviously depending on where your school is, which area the school falls in. Schools that are in wealthier areas, the subsidy that they receive per child is a lot less than the subsidy that schools will receive in poorer areas. All right. You'll see that it says schools in poor areas receive 6 times more than schools in wealthier areas. So in other words, for every 100 Rand that KHS would, for example, receive, a school in a poorer area will get 600 Rand for every 100 Rand that we receive. All right. In the no-fee schools also, children also get free meals. They're subsidized by the government. All right. The government comes and they provide children with one cooked meal a day. All right. Water and electricity is also subsidized. Every household with a household connection receives 6,000 litres of water free every single month. And what we use over and above that 6,000 litres, obviously we have to pay for. Same with electricity, right? Poor households get 50 kilowatts of electricity free per month. And then obviously anything that you use over and above that, obviously we have to pay for. Right, and the more you use, the more you pay because it's scarce resources. All right. Now, even if the government does consider covering the cost of providing public goods with charges, sometimes it is difficult when there's a high fixed cost involved. All right. So they can either decide to do a direct or an indirect subsidy, or they can decide to do standing charges. All right. Now, a direct subsidy is used to cover a part of the cost. All right, like for example with education. The government gives us a certain amount per child. Whatever extra we need to provide education, the parents have to pay the rest in school fees. So the government provides a certain amount and then consumers will pay what is still outstanding. The government pays a little bit and the consumers must pay the rest. That is a direct subsidy. All right, an indirect subsidy is used when accumulated losses are written off. All right, for example, sometimes at the municipality, if people are not able to pay for their water and lights, right? So their account accumulates and it gets more and more and more. The amount outstanding becomes more and more and more and more, right? At some point, the municipality might decide that, right, we are going to write off these losses. Okay, so all the money then that is owed to them by the consumer is written off and they never get that income. That is an indirect subsidy. Indirect subsidy is when they allow consumers not to pay amounts that they actually have to pay. All right, so it's not municipality is not physically paying out money to the consumers, but they are allowing consumers not to pay. Okay, they are sacrificing an income basically. All right. Now, taxes are used to finance certain municipal services like garbage removal, like sanitation, for example. In this case, the payment that you are making, the tax that you are paying, is not on the use of the service, but it is linked to the value of your property. All right. Our system had been brought in line a couple of years ago. They went around and they evaluated all the houses in all the different municipalities, and the taxes that you pay, what you pay for waste removal, what you pay, the property tax that you pay, it is linked to the value of your property. So those people with high value properties, very expensive properties, obviously their taxes are higher, which also works then on a progressive scale. It's also a way of redistributing income because wealthier people with bigger houses pays more taxes than poorer people with smaller houses. All right, and that tax money is then used to provide certain municipal services. All right, standing charges is also called availability charges. All right, now these charges are, for example, levied on electricity and water. If you look at your parents' water and lights accounts, ask them if you can see it, then you will see there's two separate amounts that is shown for electricity and there's two separate amounts that is shown for water. For both electricity and water, there is a standing charge, and these charges are fixed. It doesn't depend on how much water or how much electricity you are using. The standing charge goes towards meeting the fixed cost. In other words, to maintain the infrastructure of providing that water to your house. All right. So when the pipes burst, for example, in the street coming into your house, standing charges will be used to fix that. All right. It is there to cover the fixed cost, the infrastructure that had to be put in there to bring the service right to your house. All right. Over and above the standing charges, there's a second amount on the account. Those will be the user charges, where they will literally say to you, okay, this is how many liters of water you have used, times by whatever the unit cost is. So your user fee is whatever. And the more water you use, obviously the higher your user fee is going to be. All right. The last thing I have referred to again as well is price discrimination. Okay, price discrimination is also used with water and electricity. Price discrimination means that different consumers pay different rates for exactly the same service. All right. For both water and electricity, businesses, okay, if there's business rights on a property, businesses pay a higher rate than what households do. All right. And also the more water you use, the more you're going to pay per unit. All right. So different consumers are paying different rates for exactly the same thing. If there's business rights on your property, per unit of water that you are using, you are going to be paying more than what a household would be paying. And the pure reason for this is that businesses tend to use a lot more water and electricity than a normal average household will. And because it is scarce resources, we are basically punishing, and I'm saying that in inverted commas, we are basically punishing like users that use too much of those scarce resources.